Hello everybody, welcome to my live stream again. Got my notes here, so I'm just going to go through a couple of things that I thought were interesting and just rant about five things. So that's 4 minutes each, starting off with the latest in trans rights versus women's rights. Such a light-hearted subject, but it seems to be in the news at the moment, so let's go. What is really interesting with this particular current ideology, I suppose, is how we hear about one side of the conversation or a side of a conversation, namely rights for a certain group of people. And the rest of that sentence, the rest of that conversation is left out of the mainstream discourse. So, for example, trans rights are human rights. That's great. The rest of that sentence, though, should be, and women's rights are also human rights. But you never hear that bit. That bit is never tagged on. But it should be, because trans rights are not rights that, if they came to fruition, everything would be hunky-dory, nothing would change, and in fact the world would be a better place. That's not how that plays out. How it plays out in the real physical world where we exist and live is trans rights, in some instances, impact on and affect women's rights. And not in a positive way. So there's been no discourse around when we hear that slogan chanted and yelled and screamed at us by very often mobs of psychotic people stampeding around universities or trying to stop women's groups from meeting and talking in the park, for God's sake. When we hear that slogan shouted and screamed, we don't actually hear, well, what does that mean? What does it actually mean, a trans person's rights? Presumably they're allowed to vote, they're allowed to eat the food they want to eat, worship where they want to worship or not, go online and have discourse and debates. Nobody's stopping them. So what are the rights that they are somehow being grotesquely refused in the modern era? The right to wear clothes of the opposite sex? Okay, great. You work on that, and you are working on that. I see trans women walking down the street all the freaking time. I've got them in classes where I teach. Great, good for you. But if we start expanding that list to trans rights mean access to the toilet that is not the same as your sex, for example. What that means is a man can go into a women's toilet and do what he wants in there. Usually his business, maybe something else. Why is that a right for a man to do that to a woman's space? Where did that right come from? Who gives that right? Where does that spring from? And who says that that right takes precedence over women's rights to have their own spaces, particularly when it comes to places where you're vulnerable, when you're doing a shit, or when you're taking a piss, or when you're doing up your makeup in the women's room, or when you are in, hey plane, or some women are in prison. That's another vulnerable place. You don't have rights in prison. You don't have power in prison. You don't have a say in prison. You do what you're told. You're shunted into a room. You're locked up and the key's thrown away. You're very, very vulnerable to being abused. And there's a shitload of abuse in prisons. That's evident. Add a man into the mix, into a space where women should at least be somewhat safe in their own company. All shit starts happening. How is that a right? Who gave you that right? Where does that right come from? And again, why does it supersede women's rights? That question is just never answered. So When I can start getting some answers on that, I think things will make more sense. But for now, it's just a fucking slogan that's shouted. And it's very unclear what it means. And it's also unclear what the consequences will be. Actually, no, in some cases it's very clear, but nobody ever fucking talks about that. My neighbour's being loud again. Okay, second point. Number 2, Elon Musk versus the BBC interview. That was so satisfying. I mean, you have a lot of power to say what you want when you are the richest man in the world and extremely powerful and incredibly bright as he is. Like, you can just say whatever you want, pretty much. So, there's a bit of a power imbalance between him and the BBC journalist, that guy. I don't even know his name, but it was just so satisfying watching a pompous journalist sit there and be grilled back. I love that. I love the fact that Elon went there and made the guy try to respond to some really valid questions about, for example, misinformation. There's that word again. Again, who defined that word? Where did that word come from? Who has the right to imply that word onto other people? Let's get some clarity here. Again, there's no discourse or debate in the current climate. There's no conversation, there's no dialogue, there's no back and forth, there's no investigation of these key slogans and ideas that are thrown around, like trans rights or human rights. Well, does that imply that women's rights aren't? Of course, because women aren't actually human, didn't you know? Or what does the word misinformation mean? Explain that. Please be explicit and clear about that, because it's not actually clear. And I love the fact that Elon was like, well, what about your misinformation, BBC, that you've apparently spread in regards to things like COVID, for example? It was just really satisfying seeing the guy quickly move the conversation along, because he couldn't have an answer. He didn't have an answer, and it was just really satisfying to see an arm of a very pompous and, I think, regressive news station just having its ass handed to it on a platter. As a journalist, you'd think that these people, journalists, have questions, that they're passionate for the truth and they hunt things down and they get the juicy details and they look at all the evidence and weigh it up, and that they're able to have a conversation and answer questions. But if you, as an arm of the fourth estate of media, if you can't actually answer fucking questions and a billionaire hands your ass to you on a platter in a public forum, then we have a problem, Houston. And that's exactly the point. Journalism has regressed for multiple reasons. Technology, modernity, people's attention spans, I get that. But for fuck's sake, if you're going to interview one of the most powerful men in history, please have your wits about you. Please grow a fucking pair and be a bit sharp up here, yeah? Maybe have an espresso or some coffee before you get on stage with your little notepad, and maybe just think things through. A bit like chess, think through all the things that you could have to talk about and have the evidence on hand, have the facts. It's not that fucking difficult. If you want to learn how, go and watch religious scholars. They have to learn shit and memorize shit and passages and phrases from the Bible or the Quran or this or that. Start using your memory techniques to learn facts if you're going to be a fucking journalist interviewing Elon Musk. Otherwise, suffer the consequences. Okay. Point number 3, Harry and Meghan. Why did I write that down? I think it's really interesting that she is not going to the coronation and that she's staying home, and that she is going to be a good mother. So she's going to stay at home and give Archie his birthday party, because that's really important to her and to Archie. And maybe that's the case. Like, good on you. But God, she's a piece of work. Harry going to the coronation on his own. He's clearly still attached to his family, despite trashing the crap out of them and severing ties and blabbing and opening his mouth and blah, 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 blah. And his pants too, evidently. God, I'm not going to read that book. I have no desire to do that. But yeah, it's just interesting that Meghan is staying at home. and that she's not going to go to the coronation. And many people like H.G. Tudor and Beyond Pluto and a couple of other commentators have mentioned the fact that it would be very wounding for her as a narcissistic sociopath. This is my assumption about her personality. It's not a diagnosis. I'm not a doctor. But it's really interesting that she, as a narcissist, would not be going to an event where she can be publicly humiliated. Because even though narcissists are good at denying reality, it might be a little bit too obvious, I think. And she's clearly got other things in line for her brand, but, you know, maybe she should have gone with him. I don't actually care. I don't even know why I wrote that down. How boring. How utterly fucking boring those two are. They're money grubbers. They're hustlers. They got their dough. He's a fucking idiot and a drug taker. He's a fucking useless. The thing I don't like about Harry, besides his smug, disgusting entitlement, is his fucking hair. Like his facial hair. It's just this muffy, gross beard, and he's going bald, and he's just gross. At least William is fucking handsome and classy. But Harry's just like this muff ball of red, spiky hair, and it's just, he's so fucking gross. I'm sorry. I do not find the Windsors overall attractive. I think William is, because he inherited Diana's good looks, but the rest of them just fucking ugly. Gross. Apologies if you're a monarchist and you're obsessed with the Windsors, but they're not fucking good-looking people. Come on. Ugh, I don't know why I wrote about them. That's annoying me. Okay, Cleopatra. I remember when I was a girl, my father mentioned Cleopatra, and he said that she actually was Macedonian. Not Greek, Macedonian. Macedonia, part of, it's now the northern province of Macedonia or something. They keep changing the name because Greece gets really upset. But the Macedonians are not Greek. They're right next to Greece, just north of Greece, but they're not the same. Although Greece constantly tries to appropriate and take over the Macedonians and say they are Greek. They're not. Alexander the Great, he was Macedonian. Cleopatra, the Ptolemy line, they were fucking Macedonian. Not Greek. It's very debatable space, but they're not Greek. Anyway, it was really interesting seeing that one of the latest iterations of modern culture where we rewrite everything and we're taking a black lens, and making everything black at the moment. And now that Jada Pinkett Smith has done that to Cleopatra, I find that really interesting. I think if you were doing a fictional story or a representation of Cleopatra's life and you turned it into a kick-ass HBO series or Netflix or whatever, and you made her black, like, great, do that. Go and rewrite history again and create like a black version and do that. Yay, muzzle tov to you. But if you're doing a docu-series and you're interviewing random people who say things like, my grandma always told me Cleopatra was black, like, shut the fuck up then. Now you're getting fucking annoying, because now you are saying history doesn't actually matter and we can rewrite it because we feel that that's actually what happened and that's right to do that. Well, you can't fucking do that. You cannot try to make everything fit your narrative, particularly when there's no evidence for it. It's so frustrating. It's so ignorant. It's so just up in the air, fairy berries. Like, if you wanted to talk about Cleopatra, talk about the fact that she was Macedonian. How did a Macedonian end up in Egypt? Talk about that. Connect it to the modern struggles that the Northern Republic of Macedonia is going through in relation to its status in Europe, its status with Greece, the fact that it's constantly struggling for its own identity. Talk about that. Worship that, respect that. But Americans, Black Americans, appropriating ancient European, Middle Eastern history and putting their lens on it is an act of colonialism itself. That's the fucking irony. We hate colonialism, we hate slavery, we hate the power imbalance. But you as an American, a black American or otherwise, you already have more power than a vast majority of people on the globe. And importing and imparting American culture and American lenses onto worldwide history, onto ancient history, is so fucking banal. It's so pathetic. It's tiresome. And it's an act of colonialism. This is the irony. Americans talking about how impoverished they are, how unfortunate, how this and that. And don't get me wrong, American history, fucking tough. You want to know who else has had really shit hard history? Russia, China, England, Ireland, Africa, India. We could just go on and on and on. The difference is we don't have, for example, Indigenous Australian culture imparted across the globe onto other peoples and to audiences across the globe, wherever there's English spoken. We don't have the sufferings of Macedonians, for example, or Greeks, shoved into people's faces and into people's cultures through the American Empire or through some sort of Western hegemony over everyone else. So it's just, at this stage, it's just fucking boring. And it's ahistorical. So fuck off, Cleopatra. Black Cleopatra. Just fuck off. Okay. Last one on my little post-it notes. Trans ballerina. I think I wrote that not just because of the hideous. It reminded me of that hideous display of the trans ice skater who was really shit. And the trans ballerina was equally just shit. And Ben Shapiro said something like, feminism, or the new feminism, is a group of female ballerinas going up to a male ballerina, pretending to be a woman, and giving him flowers. And smiling politely while they do it. And I just thought, holy fuck, that's so true. That is what modern feminism seems to be about. A group of women going up to a guy who says that he's a woman, therefore it's true. Ta-da! Like a magic transmutation. Women going up and obediently, as part of a performance, giving roses to a man that is encroaching on their space and is being idolized and worshipped and admired and respected above them, even though he's shit at ballet. And just, it was such a poignant line and a poignant moment, and I think it's really disturbing and telling that a lot of commentary about women's rights is coming from right-wing commentators who are nailing it, and nothing's being said or seems to be said from the left or from actual feminists. What does that word even mean these days? I don't know. It means giving a fucking rose to a male ballerina who's pretending to be a female ballerina. Fuck's sake. I don't even know what the word means anymore. I don't know if it's useful or not. I think women's rights is more interesting. I think the word woman is more interesting right now. Maybe that's the feminist fight. I don't know. I sort of took a rest from feminism for about the last 10, 15 years because I do live in the West. I do have rights. I do have free speech and freedom for now. I can earn my own money. I can speak my mind. I can get a divorce. I have property rights. I have everything. I am the luckiest woman and the luckiest generation in history as far as women are concerned. And so I put my fucking feminist hat on the door and retired. But now, whoop-diddy-doo-dah, I'm back in action, folks, with all this trans fucking bullshit. The irony is, I didn't even care. Like, I've met quite a few trans women now, and lovely people, gentle, minding their own business, living their life. I respect them, they respect me. No problem, no issue at all. It's actually none of my fucking business. what people want to wear or do behind closed doors, as long as it's not illegal, as long as it doesn't involve animals or children or people underage, and as long as I don't have to have it shoved in my face. Live and let live. The problem now is that it's encroaching on women's rights. So like I started today earlier at the start, trans rights are human rights. Well, what about women's rights? Are women even human? Do you not add women into that statement because women aren't human beings? I don't know. So it's that sort of messy invasion of women's spaces. That's the problem. And I think that's the main difference between the gay rights movement of the last 40, 50 years, 60 years, versus the trans movement of the last 10, 20 years. The gay rights did not try to encroach upon anyone else. They just said, we have a desire to do the same things that straight couples do, like get married, like adopt, like live our lives in peace and privacy and celebrate just who we are, without being mugged or killed or stoned to death or have the crap beaten out of us. And I think that's fair. And most people are like, yeah, all right, fair enough. But the trans rights, that's not the premise. The premise is what I think up here instantly and magically becomes physical reality for everyone else. You have to obey it. You have to believe it. You have to listen to me. And if you don't, you're going to go to fucking jail because you're a bigot. Boom. Oh, and by the way, trans women, are going to go and invade women's spaces and take over their sports and their prisons and their private spaces because, again, if a man thinks it, it must be true. And you bitches out there with your fucking vaginas and your cervixes and all that going on, your bits and pieces, if you don't succumb to what I want, I will punch you in the fucking face. Hi, Auckland. I will kidnap you and hold you to ransom. Hey, University of San Francisco, was it? Fuck's sake. If you don't go along with us, we'll fucking kill you, J.K. Rowling. That's the mentality of that movement and that ideology. So it's completely misogynistic and homophobic and anti-science and anti-reality and anti-free speech and anti-fucking everything, anti-women. So that's the problem. And it's going to have a massive backlash. Massive. And the irony is that I don't think actual trans people's rights or their lives are going to improve because of this. I think it'll just possibly get worse. That's the irony, that this movement, which is so vitriolic, is not doing anything for anyone in a real way other than creating violence and havoc and fucking things up for people. So I don't see it going well right now, but who knows? It might change. That's about it. It's lunchtime over here, so I might call it a day, but hope you have a good one and see you later. Stay safe. Bye.